Okay, so I've been told that for a keynote like this, there are three things that I'm not supposed to do, and I'm going to do them all. So the first thing is I'm not supposed to make this a talk about myself, but for the reasons that will become obvious in a second or two, I'm going to break that rule. I was told that I'm not supposed to do a language themed conference talk without much language in it, but I'm going to do that too. And so the third rule that I'm going to break is that I'm supposed to leave like an uplifting message, but I'm going to start this with very much of a downer story. Okay, so if I've scared you sufficiently, so now Joao was saying, oh man, why did I ever invite that Bruce Tate guy, right? So what I'd like to talk about today is I'd like to make an introduction of myself, and I want to be a little bit personal because I know that in the Elixir community and in the programming community more broadly, we're not used to that. And I don't think that that's a healthy thing. So I want to talk a little bit about my story, and I want to kind of mix in some of the lessons that lead to behaviors that lead to exponential decay. So super unhealthy behaviors. But I also want to talk about the flip sides of those behaviors and things that I think have made me a more successful author, programmer, father, and in person. And so I hope to leave you with a little bit of a inspirational message, but let's see. So this talk is called Are Not But Want to Be. And that might seem a little bit weird until I shuffle this around a little bit. So I really want to talk about R naught, like the R naught coefficient for viruses, but want to be, where to be is the power inherent in a computer with that many bits, right? So R naughts are behaviors that we want to avoid. These are things that lead to decay. But it's like a bad investment or negative interest on a loan. These things will bite you, and the disease will continue to grow over time. But to be behaviors are those things that if we make certain investments in certain ways, then we get the opposite of compounded interest on a loan. We get a compounded investment. So that's what I want to talk about today. And it'll be pretty clear, like right off the top of the story, why I'm going in this direction. And sorry that we're starting this story with a little bit of fear and a little bit of a downer of a story, but so I want to do that though. So the first part of the story is what I promised. I'm going to talk about me. I'm an author, and yes, I have written about those languages that Joao accused me of writing of. I'm guilty. I've written a lot of Java books. In fact, Bitter Java was a terrible book with a great title, but it got me started. And so from Java to Ruby was when I really started paying attention to programming languages. And from seven languages in 7 weeks, I started writing about languages out of fear and really fell in love with the idea of spending time with languages in my daily walk as a programmer. And along the way, I founded this company called Groxio Learning. I've been doing that for about 3 years now. So I want to go back to the beginning of that company. And in fact, I want to go back to when I moved to Chattanooga, which is a small town. And you can see that town you can see a river in the distance. That's the Tennessee River. We're actually in the state of Tennessee. And you can see those big blue warehouses in the upper right. Well, my house is one of those small, skinny towers right up there. And I've actually taken my bike up here to this place called Stringer's Ridge. And this is actually my 4th climb inside of 40 minutes, which might sound like a good idea and a healthy thing to do if your heart is not blocked 95% in more than one place. So yeah, there's that. So shortly after this bike ride, where I went to the top of this hill an insane number of times, I found myself taking a a test, an EKG test, and failed that. So I went back for a stress test on my heart. So I'm on a treadmill, and I'm looking over the tech's shoulder, and I'm seeing rhythms. I'm seeing noises that my heart is not supposed to be making. And so, long story short, it's a little bit too late for that, but I found myself the very next day in this waiting room. And this is in the time of COVID. So people are nervous, right? People don't want people to have procedures, but I have this blockage that's serious enough where they really want me in the very next day. And I really can't ask for which doctor. In fact, I kind of did a potluck to get seen more quickly. And so it's a scary thing, right? So I'm seeing this room around me. They're kind of hustling around and getting everything prepped. And this man walks in, which probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it means something to me, because to you, it's this guy that Bruce Tate put in this presentation. But to me, I live right here, and Vinay lives right down here, right? So my neighbor walks in, he's going to be doing the surgery, and that's not the weirdest thing that happened that day. See, they talked to me about what's going to happen, and this is kind of all surreal, and I don't remember very much of that conversation. But then I was wheeled into a room that looks like this, right? And this is the operating room, and most people don't remember what their operating room looks like because they're out for the operation. Well, I wasn't. In fact, this is the second time I've had something like this done, and I wasn't either time. But so for some reason, I didn't forget like I was supposed to. I wasn't down as deep as I was supposed to be. And that was in my file or something. So Vinay wasn't very surprised. But you see those big monitors. So they give me this incision that's just a millimeter, maybe 2 millimeters wide. It's in my wrist, and they access the blood vessels, kind of snake these tools to my heart, and then they squeeze some ink in it. And in those, every single one of those big monitors, there's this big image, right? So this is the scary part. You'll hide the kids, right? Did you catch it? I'm going to go back to that one again. Yeah, do you see that really fat part that goes into a skinny part and then to a fat part, like a tree, but a tree where the big, fat, heavy branch goes down to one tiny little twig? Well, that's my life, right? That is called the left anterior descending. And if that blocks the rest of the way, I'm dead. So very much like could happen and does happen often when people take huge bike rides up these steep hills and don't have any symptoms, so don't even know that there's a problem. I'm just really, really lucky. So then they put in this thing called a stent, which is this metal tube. You see the one on the bottom right, that's before they fill up this air balloon. And when they fill up the air balloon, it expands and opens up that artery, and that's what they did to me. So I'm going to skip to the end of this part of the story and say everything's fine. Tudo bem, mas. But. So there were no symptoms before, no symptoms after, but it's nevertheless just a gut-wrenching, extremely tense, a scary, life-changing experience that is difficult to describe. You see, I started reevaluating a lot of my decisions, and that's kind of the genesis of this talk. I started thinking about the mistakes that I'd made along the way and what I could do better, the things that I'd done well and that I could promise to continue doing well. So I want to talk about the first R naught behavior. And remember, R naught is this agent of exponential decay. So these are things that you don't want to do. So there's this lie. I'm sure it's in Brazil, it's in the United States, it's all over the world. But they say that nothing great has ever been accomplished in a 40-hour work week, right? That's a lie. That is a lie. but it's a lie that I believed increasingly in the last 10 years or so. You see, I put work first. And increasingly, I put more and more things in that bucket of what work is, like open source software. So there are some days when I wake up and I believe that open source software feels like hope. This feels like the way the world is supposed to work together. But there are other times when open source software feels to me, I take opinions a little bit too personally. And when people that I love and respect come out hard with hard opinions, it's very destructive for me. And yeah, so I thought a lot about that. And I thought a lot about putting my writing in front of my family. And all of this is ironic, right? Because I founded this company called Groxia. Well, I say I founded, that's entirely untrue. We founded, my wife and I founded this company called Groxia Learning with the central premise that we should be investing in ourselves, not in our jobs, but in ourselves in healthy ways. And by doing this, we become much better employees. By working sane hours, I become a better employee. As I'm growing, I'm a better employee. By simply taking the time to take a walk, to take time to think, to take time to manage myself, to handle my stress, to really do the things that I need to do to be a well-rounded and healthy person, I am a better employee. You see, there's this concept that I had deeply ingrained in myself that learning languages was a really, really big deal and an important deal because the people around me that spent time learning languages wound up as my mentors and as people that were big influences in my life, and they enabled me to turn around and influence others. So there's this lie, this huge are not belief that comes from managers, executives, team leads, that there is a fixed amount of work that you can get out of a person. And so you apply them to the job all of the time. And if they take time to play, then this fixed amount of work goes down necessarily in proportion. But you see, that's not what the science says. So we did a lot of research, and here's one of them. So essentially, they found that dopamine was tied to the brain centers that impact motivation and reward. So, and I'll let you read this later. We'll post this online. But joy sparks motivation, and thus joy sparks productivity. So what really happens when you take time to learn languages, when you take time to play, when you take time to invest in yourself and actually trigger those sentences or those centers in the brain that trigger healthy cortisol and dopamine, you start to find that you become more productive. Healthy, well-rounded people become more productive, right? And it actually turns out that this isn't just a one-time interaction, that by taking disciplined time out of your schedule to play, you become a much more productive employee, programmer, person, right? And work's a lot more fun. So I want to talk a little bit about one of these books. I kind of mentioned it briefly. There's a book called 7 Languages in 7 Weeks. This was hugely influential in my life because of, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of them was I got to meet a lot of the creators of the languages in this book. Initially, just over email, and then eventually in person. But one of the friends in this book was, well, let me not spoil that part of the story yet. You know, you probably heard some of this story before, but as I was writing this book, I wrote the Ruby chapter first, and I felt pretty good about that. And then I wrote the prologue and Erlang chapters, and I had those together. And my editor kind of corners me, and she says, "Hey, Bruce, this is going to be a really good book. And she has the sense for things like that. She's Jacqueline Carter. You can see her name kind of in the blurry bottom left corner there. But she has a second sense for books that are going to succeed. And this one certainly was teed up to be a big success. And she said, I have to get this out to some reviewers who really know what they're doing to really protect this. I said, okay, knock yourself out. I don't have any reviewers that know these languages. She says, I think I know somebody. So she sent those 2 chapters to Joe Armstrong, right? And I don't know if you've met Joe. If you have, he's not a Braveheart. He is a wizard, though, a big wizard, right? And so as he was reading my book, he captured copious notes, just a ton of notes. And they were happy notes for the Erlang language, which is interesting because I had no experience with Erlang at all. I had a little bit of experience with Prolog, though, but he completely tore that chapter up, right? And so eventually I swallowed my pride and I said, hey, Joe, could you help me with this chapter? And he was just absolutely thrilled. So, I had this stuff in there that was earlier. And this is the one example that I kind of left in. It's a really kind of a simple piece of the framework or of the book where I basically specified these facts, where I had food types and I had these flavors. I said, okay, Ritz is a cracker and Jolt is a soda, and meat is savory and cheese is savory and soda is sweet. And then I had these rules like food X is of flavor Y if food X is of type Z and Y has the flavor of Z. And so then you can ask Prolog questions and Prolog can spit out the answer, which I thought was really cool. And then Joe said, you should do the map coloring problem. No, this isn't an electoral map. In fact, I kind of like the map coloring that came out of the election with reds and blues. This is a map coloring program where you have countries, or in this case, states. This is actually the lower right-hand corner of the United States. And our goal is to produce a map coloring where no contiguous states are colored in the same color, right? So Joe was kind of walking me through this, and he led with a very loose leash, and he said, well, code up some rules. And then so I coded up the rules. I said, okay, well, I'll have these atoms because, red, lowercase red is an atom in Erlang. And I said, well, red is different from green, red is different from blue, so on and so forth, right? Those are all individual rules. And then I said, take these variables and make these things all different. And then Joe said, well, and then I said, okay, so now let me give it the algorithm. And Joe said, just try what you got, right? So, I was expecting to get the full combination of all of these colors. And Prolog spits out the answer, right? Alabama's blue, Florida's green, Georgia's red, Mississippi's red, Tennessee is green, which was crazy. I had not told Prolog how to do anything. And Joe Armstrong is on the other end of the phone laughing, just laughing. It was uncanny. So I'd come to know through the years that there are days when Joe loves Prolog as much or more as he loves Erlang. Well, we lost Joe Armstrong, and it hit me pretty hard. And I was preparing a talk with this story in it. And there was an emotional moment that happened. I was down and I was looking for guidance. And so I was just Googling for quotes for some confirmation that I'd started this company called Groxio, that I'd done the right thing. And I just asked the question, does learning programming languages matter, right? And so somehow I clicked around and found this link. And I started reading it and I said, yeah, this is interesting. A Zen master might tell you that to be better at mathematics, you better study Latin. Thus it is with programming. To better understand the essence of object-oriented programming, you should study logic programming or functional programming. To be better at functional programming, you should study assembler. Today, not only can we read about the ideas, but we can try them in practice. This makes the difference between standing on the poolside wondering whether it would be nice to swim and diving in and enjoying the water. And of course, this was by Joe. But what's interesting is that this was the foreword for 7 languages in 7 weeks. And I was floored. It's like Joe was talking to me from the grave. Really beautiful moment. So I want to talk a little bit about teams and the smaller teams that work on problems and the bigger organizations called companies. And some of this happened at a company called Changing the Present. This was my first opportunity to be a CTO of a small company. Don't use it, by the way. It's not a good way to give. Too much of this goes to the companies that manage it. But I wanted to talk about some of these lessons. So I met Mats while I was working. Mats, the creator of Ruby, while I was working at Changing the Present, at Wellgood, the company that built Changing the Present. And one of the things that I love about Mats is he knew the language that he wanted to create. And I love this quote from Mats. He wanted to build a language that made people happy. You see, at the time, we were coding Java, and Java had a lot of configuration. Most of that was in XML with these sharp, pointy angle brackets that look like they might hurt you. And there was nothing that was ever defaulted. So everything was just completely and perfectly tedious. And Matt came out with this language that stripped away all of the unnecessary ceremony. And that was beautiful for me, especially as a dyslexic. But the thing I remember about Mats is not what he said, but the thing that people said about him. Mats is nice, and so we are nice. Minaswan, Mats is nice, and so we are nice. And if that's not the best to-be behavior in the history of programming languages, I don't know what is. We should steal it in the Elixir community. So one of the things that I did pretty often as I was learning Ruby on Rails is I would throw everything into one big fat application, into a monolith with one database. And I found that a lot of people have this problem when they're writing in object-oriented languages or in these frameworks that are like Ruby on Rails, that we really just have 3 layers of the system and that's it. And there's not a lot of thought in some of the APIs. And I certainly built my share of them. But the idea is that most people have one language to rule them all. And in the darkness bind them. Yeah, Lord of the Rings. I love that quote. So I took this idea into I Can Make It Better, but this is about the time, would have been about 2000, somewhere between 2010, 2012. So this is one of the things in my career that I'm most proud of. So Adolfo, hi Adolfo, I'm sure you're watching, but he found this quote in a podcast that this was another one of those moments that kind of gave me goosebumps. It says, but it was when I read 7 Languages in 7 Weeks by Bruce Tate, I had all these options in front of me and Erlang was shining, by my friend Joe, who wrote the foreword for me for that book and opened all these doors. And so maybe a little bit of Elixir inspiration happened there. Jose and I got to work together. We wrote a couple of books together. And this got me thinking about this idea that too many people believed that language is a permanent choice, because Jose certainly believed that language was a competitive advantage. But many of the companies that were working in Java and increasingly Ruby believed that you could have a competitive advantage by doing things that were much more traditional, which is weird, right? So the idea that you could build something and that you could resist change and have that actually better than actually exploring and learning things that were true and interesting, right? And so after this procedure, as I was just taking inventory of my life's work, of the companies that I worked with, I had this epiphany based on the idea, something that I already knew from all the books, right? That a thinking tool is a competitive advantage, that a framework is a competitive advantage. So my epiphany was that the right language is a competitive advantage only if the choice is inexpensive enough, only if you are free to make the choice. A language is a competitive advantage only if you are free to make the choice. Because the truth is that architecture enables choice. And we can do something about that, right? We can simplify interfaces every day, every time that we're in a code base. Here's one of Jose's favorite ones. We could minimize dependencies every day that we're in the code base. By doing so, we improve our options every day that we're in our code base. Interesting. So as I was at I Can Make It Better, I really liked the man that I was working with, and he really embraced the Matt's philosophy of management. Matt's is nice, and so we are nice. But naturally, I'm not going to talk about the good decisions that my friend Paul made, but one of the ones that was a little bit, we both came to recognize as a little bit, not so great. So we had this thing where we would try to sell more licenses with a newsletter, and we would try to announce new features in the newsletter that put this artificial pressure on the team to build new features before we were done with the previous ones, right? So the R naught behavior was, my CEO said that building features drives success. It drives customers. It makes our product better. And I found that building new features without deleting code is a slow march towards death. Because what's happening is you are building an increasing engine that's going to take more and more people to sustain, particularly if you don't clean up the interfaces as you go. So what I've found since then is that my long-term success is tied to my delete key. My long-term success is tied to my delete key. Okay, I want to talk about one last section. This one I call them. It's a little bit ominous and foreboding. That's okay. So one of my good friends, Stuart Halloway, threw this great quote at me, and I've not stopped thinking about it since. He said, if you are hiring for expertise in a particular stack, I assume that you only care about the next 90 days. Instead, you should hire problem solvers, right? And when you do that, you get an incredible amount of freedom because you can hire people that are outside of the traditional box. This really has a point, and I'm going to get there. So I went to a conference about 8 years ago It looked like this. If you count them, that's 400 white guys and 3 of anything else. 400 white guys and 3 of anything else. This shook me to the core and terrified me. I said, what are we doing? This is the future, the leadership, right? You don't have to look at it exactly through this lens. I don't know what the hiring practices are in Brazil. I don't know what the hiring practices are for people that are minorities, of women, of LGBT, of handicap. I don't know what the hiring practices are, but I believe in most places we need to look at what we're doing now is a toxic and poisonous behavior that has to improve. And the truth is, we know how to improve this. We know that mentoring works. In fact, many of the people that are attending today, Adolfo, Yuri, Herminio, Christine, those are 4 people from Brazil that are in my mentoring program called Elixir Chat, which is an excellent program that seeks to open up the idea of what it means to be an Elixir developer. And we know that diversity scholarships and price breaks to expand communities works. So Joao mentioned that we put on some conferences. Well, the first one was one called Gig City Elixir, and we expected to have. We set a target of 8% of the people in the audience. We wanted them to be women, right? Well, we started giving out scholarships and we started mentoring people, and wouldn't you know it, people started showing up. So 25% of everybody, no, I'm sorry, 33% of every person that was at Gig City Elixir was a minority in some way. It just shattered our goals. I don't think that this is a great representation in terms of what's possible. I think that we could completely crush this record, and I think that this isn't something that that Bruce Tate has has kind of the silver bullet to solve. I think that these are techniques that we can apply to the whole Elixir community and beyond. Right? Invite people and they come. Mentor people and they'll be part of it. Right? We know how to reach out to people who are not like us and bring them into our community. And in fact, this is one of the cool classes that I've been doing. There's there are other classes where I could show you where there's a pretty good cross section of women also, but this particular class, there are 5 continents represented here, right? And so the way that it works is that we tell people that we are going to give away 1 ticket to a diversity seat for every single class that we put on, right? And that works, right? And as these classes grow, and as the reputation of the programs grows, that people want to be a part of it, and so it works out for me financially as well. So the 2B behavior is don't accept less than what you want the world to be. So the worst are not behavior that you could possibly have is really not a behavior, but more of a mindset. And the mindset is that my career happens to me. In truth, you have agency. You can affect what happens in your career and in your team and in your company and in the world. You have agency. So invest in yourself. Be kind. Improve your options every day. And don't accept less than the community that you want to see. Any questions?
I wish I could give you like a 400 people round of applause, but wow. I'm not crying. You're crying. Well, what do I have to say about this all? It was incredible. Thank you so much, Bruce. It meant a lot for all of us. Be sure that Elixir Brasil stands for those values. And we know that 2020 has been such a struggle for everyone, but we do know that this struggle has been felt differently across the globe, and it means a lot. Yeah, sorry. It means a lot for us. It was really nice to have you here with us talking about all of these things, having a moment to remember Joe. So we also miss him a lot, and yeah, this was so nice. I'm truly speechless. Thank you, really. Thank you so much for it.
You're welcome. And thank you so much for the invitation. I can't tell you how much the relationships, one of the things that happened during this pandemic is that many of us started reimagining the way the decisions that we've made, the way that our companies could move forward. So one of the things that I had to give up was my mentoring program. And what's happened, we started opening the doors to people beyond the beyond our city, and then Kenyans started showing up, Brazilians started showing up, and so having Adolfo, Edminio, Judy, Christine. You invite one Brazilian, and then suddenly everything is a party. So it's been really important to me, this community especially.
That's so nice to hear. Yeah. So just so you know, Adolfo has been here with us today. We ran a panel with him and other folks to talk about education. So spot on in terms of team. And yeah, I'm pretty sure he and Herminio and Yuri and everyone else, they're watching our live broadcast right now, and I'm pretty sure they are excited about like being mentioned here and like doing this. So this was our intention in bringing international speakers. Elixir Brasil, it's completely focused on the Brazilian Elixir community. The whole conference is all in Portuguese. We're called Elixir Brasil with S, not with Z, with Z, because it's really something for our Brazilian Elixir community. But nevertheless, it's so nice to have this kind of cultural exchange sometimes, and also bring huge names like yourself to share a few words. I think it's something that is inspiring, and it's also something that we should do like way more, because it also means like sharing different experiences and aligning ourselves towards those common goals. So it was really nice to see that no matter if we are in São Paulo, or if we are in Chattanooga, or if we are in Kenya, any place in the world, people would have some similar problems to share, and they'll be willing to share those experiences and build something stronger together. So I really appreciate the kind of work that you've been doing at Crux. So yeah, thank you for that as well.
You're welcome.